ya a punto de iniciar la conferencia magistral. Esperemos unos minutos, por favor.
Buenos días. Buenos días. Vamos a iniciar con la primera sesión. ¿Me escuchan? Sí. Vamos a iniciar con la primera sesión, que es un Keynote Speech, y voy a continuar en inglés. This is a Keynote Speech by Professor Wonki Min, and that's the phenomenon of big data in the digital transformation. And before I give the floor to Professor Wonki Min, let me introduce him. Professor Wonki Min is Vice Minister of the Ministry of Science and ICT in Korea. He has been Deputy Minister of the Korean Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning. And he was the spokesperson of that ministry when it was established in 2013. At the international level, Professor Wonki Min is the chair of the OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy, and also served as chair between 2003 and 2004, and vice chair of the OECD Telecommunications and Information Service Working Party. He is co-author of Digital Convergence Strategy, and also he has written several other books as Regulatory Reform in Japan, Regulatory Reform in the Netherlands. He also wrote the articles on broadband and job creation. And Professor Min holds an MBA from the University of Washington, and a Master in Public Administration from Seoul National University, and BA in History from Yonsei University, Republic of Korea. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Professor Wonki Min, who is connecting with us through the internet, by the way. so if you can make the connection, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ordaz. And it seems that we have some technical difficulties in video link. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, probably could you speak a little bit louder?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let me turn up the volume. Could you hear me better right now?
Yes.
Okay,
sure.
Thank you. It seems that we have to move forward without video. And it's 11 p.m. in Korea, 11:21 p.m. in Korea, so my looks must not be very good. So I think it might be better without having this video link. Buenos dias, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wonki Min. I'm Vice Minister of the Ministry of Science and ICT of South Korea. And as introduced, I'm also chairing the OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy. And I used to be the professor just a week ago, but I recently actually appointed as the vice minister. So I quit my professor role at the State University of New York in Korea. So I'm not anymore in the academia, and I'm serving once again as a public servant. And the reason I actually accepted the request of this keynote speech was at the time I was in academia. So some of my presentation, and I cannot actually speak for the government or for the OECD, so I'm making this presentation in my personal capacity. First of all, I'm honored to make a keynote speech at the seminar on privacy and confidentiality of information organized by Infotech and INECI. And I'm sorry for not making physical presence at the seminar. However, thanks to the internet, we are using this teleconference, and actually we are generating a lot of data in this conference call, which is the topic of today's discussion. And during my presentation, you could see, I hope all of you have the slides in front of you, the PowerPoint slides. Do you have my PowerPoint slide?
Not yet.
Not yet. Actually, I tried to upload it, but because of the technical difficulties, I couldn't do that. And as you can see, we have this broken video link. So I tried to actually deliver my message as succinctly and as clearly as possible without the PowerPoint presentation. But hopefully, my message can be delivered to all of you. And I do not want to.
Your slides are on now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm still in the cover page, by the way. And during my presentation, you could see that some slides show the findings of the OECD works. In particular, 7 vectors of digital transformation have been identified through the OECD Going Digital project. And while most of the ideas and thoughts in the presentations are in line with the understanding of the OECD and the policies of the government of Korea, some are my own thoughts. And as I already told you, I'm making this presentation in my personal capacity. And the title of my presentation is The Phenomenon of Big Data in the Digital Transformation. And when I look at the agenda, I found that in the following sessions, the speakers will cover the specific issues on big data, especially on security and confidentiality issue. My presentation will focus on the big picture of this digital transformation in relation to big data. Could you move to the page number 2 in the presentation? We are living in a world that is increasingly digital and data-driven. Big data, defined with huge volume, velocity, variety, velocity, and the value of data is a foundational driver of digital transformation. And digital transformation powered by big data affects all aspects of the economy and society in complex and interrelated ways, challenging existing policies in many areas and offering both opportunities and challenges. And it is very important to know the capability of digital technologies in order to better understand the impact of digital transformation and the role of big data. Can you move to the page number 3? Next page, yes. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, thank you. When I was college in 1980s, I was also a late baby boomer. The world's most powerful computer was actually Cray 2. And amazingly, now most of smartphones and tablets have more processing power than Cray 2, which was the most powerful computer in 1980s when I was studying in college. And which means that most of us bring the 1980s supercomputer in our pockets. These exponential reductions in the size and the cost of transistors since their invention in 1947 is the main enabler of the digital transformation by empowering new digital technologies. Next slide, please. And when you look at this use of an ecosystem of digital technologies, which actually builds on digitization and interconnectedness, so-called internet. And the importance of this ecosystem is when you look at each technology, big data, cloud computing, Internet of Things, robotics, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, distributed ledger, so-called blockchain technologies, they are all connected. Without big data, we do not need cloud computing. And without Internet of Things, we cannot actually generate many information and data. And without data, we cannot actually have this kind of machine learning-based artificial intelligence and blockchain distributed ledger technologies. So they are all connected. And most importantly, the impact of this whole ecosystem is larger than the sum of individual impact of each technology. So when they actually work together as an ecosystem, they bring a fundamental societal and economic change. And there is a fundamental condition for this digital innovation, which is the existence of big data. Without data, we cannot actually build this kind of ecosystem. Can you move to the next page? Yes, thank you. And this digital transformation based on these emerging digital technologies is a game changer, providing new opportunities and enabling new business models in the marketplace. You all know this Airbnb. And actually, I'm quite old. I'm 56 years old, so I have never used Airbnb, but my sons, when they travel abroad, they actually may have booked the Airbnb, use their Airbnb, and they save them money, and they find these new kind of houses when they go abroad. And in terms of these mobility services provided by Uber, Lyft, Didi, Chungxing, I think most of you are using these services when you go abroad, even in your own country. Actually, this is not allowed in my own countries. That's a pity because of the regulation, which we will address later, these regulatory issues. But because of this kind of platform services, now even the automobile companies like Ford declares themselves as a mobility company, not an automobile company. This so-called servicification kind of phenomenon would not be possible without the existence of big data. So big data changed the whole economy. And you see that these drones actually delivers everything, not just delivers everything. Actually, people are using these drones in the workplaces, so it creates a lot of security issues. So it brings benefits. At the same time, it creates a lot of political and social problems. So the governments and society as a whole, we have to address this issue. And this new platform economy actually gives us a new way to transmit the money and currencies. I'm not talking about the cryptocurrencies, but we can actually send these fiat currencies without using our banks. And you can send it without this huge fee, which you are subject to pay to the bank if you use the bank. So with these digital technologies, whole society and economy is changing. And we need to provide right regulatory measures and economic and social systems to take advantage of these digital technologies. Next slide, please. And the thing is, this technology, this digital technology and digital transformation is really disrupting the marketplace. When you look at the companies like Blockbuster, where I used to rent the video, and Kodak, and Borders, I love to go to Borders and took a cover copy and read the book. They were all gone. And there are newcomers like Amazon, Netflix, and Instagram. This is a simple substitution of digital companies who based on the new companies which based on these digital technologies for the kind of the companies which use the old legacy technologies. It has more than that more than that, and it has a huge implication. Let me just show you one example. When Kodak was in its heytime, it actually hired more than 180,000 employees. But when you look at the Instagram, when Instagram was sold to Facebook at $1 billion US, there were only 13 employees. So this digital transformation not only affects the kind of the market competition, it also affects the labor market and the employment. And this kind of changes in the labor market creates a lot of social tensions and political instabilities. So these are not just the economy issues, and these are more than economy issues, and we have to address these issues as a whole of a government approach. Next slide, please. And another important issue here is digital privacy and security. They are the main topics of this seminar. When you look at the left picture, which was quite famous actually, cartoon, in 1993, when New Yorker actually printed this cartoon, everybody used this cartoon so many times as a kind of symbol that in the internet, you could not show your identity and you could do a lot of things. Is that true? Not anymore. I believe all of you know very well about this Snowden case. And when Snowden revealed what he used to do when he worked at the Booz Allen Hamilton to support the US government, we were all shocked. But that's the reality. That's the reality. With the development of digital technologies, we are subject to this kind of risks of breaching digital privacy and security. And can we actually avoid this kind of incidents? Maybe not. That's the reason many people say that digital resiliency is much more important than actually protecting this kind of hackings and any kind of incidents on digital security. All of us will experience more and more kind of hackings and digital threats. But what we can do and we should do is build a resilient economic and social system which could absorb this kind of attacks and minimize the kind of the damages coming from these digital attacks. Next slide, please. So, before moving to the big data and data economy, let me briefly introduce this 7 vectors approach, which actually introduced by OECD. So in order to better understand the transformative effects that the use of digital technologies and data can have across the economy and society, the OECD has identified 7 vectors of digital transformation that identify key properties of digital transformation. When you look at the slide, there are 3 kind of big areas: scale, scope, and speed, and ownership, assets, and economic value, and relationships, markets, and ecosystems. And there are 7 vectors. We will look at one by one. Next slide, please. So first, scale without mass. The low marginal cost of many digital products allows firms to scale quickly and globally. more easily than with physical products, while making comparably less investment in tangible assets and amassing fewer employees. You can see the examples of Coursera, WhatsApp, and Wikipedia. And this actually scale without mass challenges policies aimed at small businesses. You cannot say WhatsApp is a small company because they only have 55 employees. When we provide some kind of policies which support small and medium-sized enterprises, one of the standards for that is the number of employees. But in this digital economy, especially with the phenomena of scale without mass, the policy itself needs to be revised, reflecting this phenomenon of scale without mass. Next slide, please. Panoramic scope. The digitization of functions, both through data flows and through processes enabled by software, lowers the barriers to gaining scope through the ability to combine, process, and integrate data resources within and across different products and at a global level. So when you look at the case of Amazon, they're providing all kinds of services. This is not even mentioning about this O2O. Just in the online, they are providing all sorts of services. And this phenomenon challenges policies based on traditional, sectional, and product lines. Next slide, please. Speed, temporal and intertemporal dynamics. The use of digital technologies accelerates interactions, generating economic and social opportunities, but there's disruptions, as we mentioned, and enhance the value of past information, making it more easily accessible and reusable. And when you look at this table, years until used by 25% of US population, just to look at the smartphone, less than 5 years. When you look at the electricity, it's more than 45 years. So it challenges legacy policies and slow policy making. Technology is moving so fast. If you just maintain the legacy regulatory framework, there is a kind of discrepancy between your regulation and the market. So we have to address this issue. Next slide, please. Intangible capital and new forms of value creation. Data flows and online platforms are being used to develop the service potential of capital goods, for example, jet engines, tractors, computers, houses, or cars, and to enable value creation that is decoupled from any specific location. Good examples are Rolls-Royce. They are not selling the engine. Now they are selling the engine service powered by the hour, and New Holland and AWS. And this phenomenon challenges the policies directed at capital, for example, tax incentives or accounting rules and trade policies. Next slide, please. Transformation of space. The possibility to move intangible digital value across the global internet undermines conventional constraints of location, distance, and jurisdiction, and changes the role that space used to play for production, trade, and consumption. And this phenomenon challenges policies based on location. So when you look at, especially the tax policy, all of us discuss how we can actually tax this platform service which actually provide these services to the global market. Next slide, please. Empowerment at the edges. The internet architecture and digital technologies empower intelligence at the edge of networks, broadening markets and communities, and increasingly moving previously centralized responsibility, for example, privacy and security, to decentralized users. It empowers that network edges can increasingly circumvent traditional gatekeepers or hubs, and this phenomenon challenges policies that used to rely on central points, which is security, privacy, and government services. Next slide, please. This is the last vector, which is platforms and ecosystems. Digital intermediation, for example, in e-commerce, social networks, content distribution, or search and storage, leads often to the centralization of control of data, which in turn can become a strategic asset and competitive advantage. All of us know the lock-in effect. And when you use Google, actually nowadays when I actually go on a mission, I do not bring my computer, USB, anything. Actually, I only bring my smartphone and I download everything from Google Drive, G Drive. So when you become used to this kind of convenience, it's almost impossible to get away from this ecosystem, which actually lock you in this Google platform, and you are using all sorts of these Google platforms. So it actually challenges about the competition policy, how to define the market, and how to define the dominant player in specific market segment. So these are the kind of the vectors, 7 vectors the OECD has identified to understand the digital transformation. And next slide, please. Yes. All this kind of phenomena, when you look at these 7 vectors and the changes we are experiencing based on these data technologies, data is a core driver of this whole data innovation. And the use of big data promises to significantly improve products, processes, organizational methods, and markets, a phenomenon referred to as data-driven innovation. And there was a publication coming from the OECD about this data-driven innovation, and there were many, many examples how data can improve productivity and efficiency in a firm level, at the same time in the economy level. So if you are interested in the kind of the data, in the statistics about the bright side of the big data, please find that publication. And when you look at the next slide, please. When you look at the drivers of data economy, we all know this Moore's law, doubling of computing power every 18 months at constant cost. So the cost of computing has dropped. And it's amazing. It's not the law of physics. It's not the law of physics, or this is not the mathematics. But this Moore's law has been there since 1970. This is amazing, amazing thing. So with this Moore's law, the computing cost is going down, and the storage. There is some echo. Is it only on me or you too? There's two. There's.
No, we don't hear.
Okay, thank you. So it's only me. Yeah, then it's okay. So because thanks to this increase of the computing power and the storage and the dropping of sensor prices, the Moore's law is still working, and that helps the kind of sustainable development of data economy. Next slide, please. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yes. Due to the rapid improvement in computing power, the current CPU performance has been enhanced to the level of supercomputers just 15 years ago, and the rapid development of networking speed and reach makes it possible that more and more data can be shared with more people. And the rise of a whole new breed of databases, which is Google's MapReduce or Hadoop, over the last 15 years, that are capable of storing diverse and unstructured data rather than the highly curated and finely structured data records of the 1980s. Next slide, please. So when you look at the data economy in a snapshot, according to the OECD, the global market for big data related technology and services at 17 billion in 2015, with a growth rate of 40% on average every year since 2010. And firms using data-driven innovation have raised the productivity faster than non-users by around 5 to 10%. Data-driven innovation may favor concentration and greater information asymmetry, and with that shift in power away from individuals to organizations, from traditional businesses to data-driven businesses, and from governments to data-driven businesses. And actually, from this one, there are kind of issues of growing inequality, the kind of competition issue based on the kind of the dominance in platform. So those issues, we already actually visited those issues when we actually look at the factor issue. So we'll move to the next page. So with this understanding that many countries and many governments actually share the idea that data is a key driver of the economic growth, they come up with a lot of initiatives, and the slide shows, next slide please. This slide shows the kind of data economy framework proposed by European Union. And when they come up with this building a European data economy 2017, they came up with this framework. And this framework very well showed that what are the kind of the framework conditions, regulatory framework conditions and non-regulatory framework conditions, and what are the processes and who are involved in this whole processes. Next slide, please. So countries are actually making efforts to take advantage of this data economy. So the US came up with the Federal Big Data Research and Development Strategic Plan in 2016. And EU actually came up with this building a European data economy last year. Next slide, please. And China also made this big data industry development plan 2017. And Japan also made investments for future strategy 2017. And my country, Korea, actually made data industry vitalization strategy this year. 2 days ago, we had a regulatory reform on data use kind of event where our president was also in presence. And the point was, actually, in that regulatory reform conference, the president himself emphasized the importance of use and reuse of this data to support the economic growth. At the same time, he also emphasized importance of the protection of personal data. And striking the balance between the protection of personal data and use and reuse of data for economic growth is not easy. It's not easy because there are so many stakeholders involved here, and there are so much vested interest there. So even at that reform conference, what President actually suggested was this is time to discuss and find out the kind of way to actually to provide a measure which can be accepted by all stakeholders. So even though you have some kind of strategies like Korea, Japan, China, and US, you still have existing laws and regulations which actually support two conflicting values. One is economic development. The other is protecting personal privacy and personal information. So striking the balance is not an easy kind of task, And how to find the kind of balance is our homework. We have to actually work together in the international level and to need to study the best practice and share the knowledge and experience on this matter with each other. And I think that's the purpose of this seminar. Next slide, please. And when you look at the examples of how to use this big data in the business, you can see this Amazon's recommendation system, so customized advertising. Next slide, please. Next, yeah, precision farming. Next slide, please. And precision medicine. When we are talking about this precision medicine, we have this biodata issue that's a little bit controversial. So when we look at the benefits of this precision medicine and precision farming, we all know that how it can increase the productivity and it can increase the kind of chances to provide the better healthcare services. But at the same time, how to anonymize the kind of personal data and information is a kind of challenge we simultaneously address. Next slide, please. So now we will briefly look at the impacts and benefits from data economy, actually identified IDC 2017. When you look at the impacts, it can increase the revenue and it can bring cost savings. Next slide, please. It can also enhance the operational efficiency and increase effectiveness. Next slide, please. And it also promotes ICT adoption and deployment and entrepreneurship and new ventures. Yes, it has a lot of kind of benefits, but it also has a lot of challenges. So next slide, please. So when you look at this data economy, there are strong incentives to gather more and more data about consumers. And this kind of incentives in the business should be balanced against consumers' interests and privacy, especially the issue of re-identification of individuals with the data mining, linking, merging, and reuse of large data sets should be carefully actually monitored, and we should have a very clear and transparent guideline or rules and regulations to govern this issue. And that's the reason actually many people are talking about privacy by design in order to protect the personal information. And cybersecurity issue, we have this cybersecurity issue. That's the reason many people are talking about security by design. And in relation to this privacy issue, recently World Economic Forum, actually, when they actually published this new book on this fourth industrial revolution, they came up with the notion of data ethics. And many people are talking about this AI ethics issue. And now people are actually connecting this ethics on AI issue with the data ethics issue. So I believe that there will be more discussion on this data ethics issue in the international level. And we need to actually come up with some kind of general guidelines, how to collect data and how to use data and how to reuse data against the protection of personal information. Next slide, please. And there's data ownership issue. So who will own, control, and take responsibility for the data? So consumers need transparency and empowerment as regards their own data. And there is another important issue is open data, to make the vast amount of data collected by governments and international institutions available to public so that individuals and companies can use it. This open data policy is especially important for supporting the small and medium-sized enterprises, because the big platform companies have capacity to correct the data, but small and medium-sized companies, they do not have that kind of capacity. So the only way they can actually access the data is actually using this government data. So open data policy can be a good tool to support the small and medium-sized enterprises. Next slide, please. And there are other challenges of data economy. One of those is cost operational expenditures. So the constantly increasing data in all different forms has led to a rising demand for data processing in sophisticated data centers. And increasing data traffic needs to be dealt with in an efficient and fair manner to all competitors. This is a kind of natural neutrality issue and zero rating issue. And effective solutions have to be brought forward to clarify and simplify jurisdictions. Now, we'll move to the last slide of my presentation. This is the conclusion. So next slide, please. So my conclusion is we need the balance between personal data protection and big data use. Big data will not achieve its aims unless something can be done at this point in time to assure individuals that their personal privacy is protected. And the most certain way to create the feeling that consumers have control is to actually confer control through privacy by design, algorithmic transparency, and privacy-sensitive corporate policies and government regulations such as GDPR were communicated to a digitally educated public. And anonymization and pseudonymization can serve as a safe harbor from the application of data privacy rules entirely, provided they are used to irreversibly prevent identification. The promise of new benefits and value-sharing propositions will incentivize individuals to act without compromising organizations' ability to harness big data, such as my data, derived from portability rights. So this is a data ownership issue. So this is the end of my presentation. I do not believe that I have provided kind of the solutions or a kind of answers which you would like to address in this seminar. But what I would like to, I hope is actually the issues I raised in my presentation can be addressed in the later sessions, and the experiences and knowledge you have and all experts have and the countries and the companies have can be shared to all stakeholders. So as a whole global community could be benefited by this seminar. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Perdón, antes de darle la palabra al doctor Santaella, les quiero pedir que las preguntas que quieran formular me las pasen por escrito. Mis colegas te pasan unas tarjetas. So if you have any questions, please ask my colleagues for a small card so that you can write them down. Now I give the floor to Mr. Santaella for comments as a discussant of the session.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Vice Minister Wonki Min. It's a pleasure to listen you all the way. I suppose it's from Seoul, but wherever you are in Korea. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person during the OECD forum later in November, where we'll be probably discussing some of these issues once again, along with some other ones. I believe there's no better way to start this seminar, to kick off by summarizing these vectors, impacts, and benefits, all the challenges that we face from the digital economy. Now, Vice Minister Wonki Min calls it the data economy. And I think it's very remarkable how to understand the different vectors that are really impinging into the activities that we are facing. I believe that one thing can be said is that there's a huge fact that the digital transformation of society represents a structural change for the global economy. In fact, I have lost the count, but it seems that it has been called the fourth or the third industrial revolution, or the fifth. I don't know where are we in this count, but the idea, it's clear that we're living in a new era, that all this technological change has allowed for a new way of relationships. And in particular, Vice Minister Wonki Min has made clear all the different applications and examples. And of course, together with that has come the different challenges that we face. And I would like to concentrate more on the challenges for national statistical organizations. Of course, we have to remain a reliable source of information, even in the new landscape of the new ecosystem of data. We have to, we face different types of challenges. One of the most pointedly that has been discussed in the OECD is measuring global value chains. Professor Wonki Min made clear that one of the vectors is that location has become difficult to pin down or has become irrelevant in the production process, and therefore borders are not the same in this new digital economy. And therefore, when we want to measure economic activity, we have to deal where in order to put the value added at different stages of production, where do we have to do these things? And of course, as Sergio Carrera mentioned, this has been one of the issues in the negotiations of NAFTA. I mean, the digital economy and how these things moves. I mean, between the three partners and other trade participants. Of course, we also have to measure the value of intangible assets. It's a known, at this stage, it's an anecdote, but it became, I guess, a statistical crisis when in 2015, the Ireland's CSO had to revise the GDP numbers by 15% because a movement in one intangible asset. And of course, that's a huge challenge because GDP has become a very important headline statistics in the economic world. And this digital economy, of course, can alter the value of the picture of an economy when we move these things. Of course, we want to keep, as I said, all the confidentiality and the protection of all the information that we get. That means that we have to remain a trustworthy institution, that informants can continue to share their information. And of course, we want to put that information to good use. And one of the most promising uses is allowing academic research through our microdata labs. But of course, that has to come together with the protection of confidentiality. There are also challenges for national mapping agencies or cartographical institutions. We have at this conference statistical bias, but I can also identify some challenges for geographical and or cartographical agencies. I mean, as I already mentioned, the digital interactions, where do they happen? I mean, many of the geographical communities adhere to the idea that everything happens somewhere, and to an extent that it's true, but sometimes that somewhere, that place, is not physical, but it's virtual. So, I mean, that's always also a challenge for cartographical or geographical institutions. I mean, where do we pin down a certain relationship? And Do we locate it? I mean, if it happens between 2 points, I mean, does it come in the origin or the destination, or somewhere in the clouds? And of course, we're also data custodians, and we have to protect and ensure the safekeeping of the data that we collect. By mandate, we are guardians and safekeepers of the data at the national statistical system, so we have to be very sure about the protecting that part. And with those few comments and reflections, more actually loose ideas, I want to turn and ask some questions to Vice Minister Wonki Min. Wonki Min, about this idea of what is privacy by design. And that's an interesting concept, but it was not clear to me the whole extent of that idea in general, and in particular whether that privacy by design and security by design should be considered, or in what extent it should be incorporated into the activities of national statistical and cartographical offices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I would like to give the floor back to Vice Minister Wonki Min to react to these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Santella. And I'm also looking forward to meeting you in November when you come to the OECD Forum here in Korea. Yeah. At the same time, if you could have a chance to visit Paris in the OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy, we would welcome you. Regarding your question about this privacy by design and security by design, actually these concepts are quite popular in the cybersecurity world and the kind of digital economy world. And we realized that actually this is also the kind of the idea of GDPR. So if certain services would be introduced in the marketplace, those services need to be digital services. When I'm talking about the services, digital services, they should consider and reflect the kind of the privacy and security from the initial stage. That's the kind of the concept of privacy by design and security by design. And this is a kind of more kind of a declarational kind of ideas, because when you look at the development of technologies, it's almost impossible to protect privacy and security completely. 100% privacy, 100% security would not be possible. That's not possible in this digital economy. When you look at the kind of cost of cyber attacks, cost of cyber attack is actually going down. And when you look at the availability of hacking method, it's growing. So when you look at the economics of this hacking, we could not actually prevent the growth of this kind of hacking. So it's almost impossible to maintain, to protect privacy and security, but at the same time, it is also quite important to provide the best possible measures to protect privacy and security in the commercial level and in the legal level and the institutional level. So that's the kind of concept of privacy by design and security by design. And when it comes to the kind of the organizations like yours, the National Statistical Bureau, and actually I intended to mention about how to measure the GDP in this digital economy and the problem of using this GDP in the digital economy, because you cannot actually measure intangible goods, as you rightly mentioned. So it's almost impossible. So we have to come up with better measures. And I don't know what would that be. We are discussing that issue in the OECD. So what kind of new statistical tools can be used to measure the economic growth, at the same time welfare of the whole economy and society. So when it comes to the privacy by design and security by design in relation to National Statistical Bureau, maybe how to collect the data and how to use the data, especially the use and reuse the data. So maintaining the pseudonymity and anonymity of the kind of the information of personal data should be considered in a kind of even the design stage of statistics. I hope that my answer would address your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Min. Now we have several questions from the audience, and I would like to read some of them to you. So let me start first with two questions that are dealing with the issue of anonymization and pseudonymization. So they are related. How do you distinguish between anonymization and pseudonymization? What do you believe is necessary to protect data against re-identification? And in the same sense, at what point of the production process of data this should be implemented, the anonymization and pseudonymization?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this is a little bit tricky, but I hope I can clearly deliver my understanding on this issue. So when we are talking about this anonymization, which means that this information is totally not related to the personal information. So when this information data is anonymized data, you can use it freely. So you can use it freely for any kind of purposes. Pseudonymization is something different, which is, in a sense, you have certain data which has personal information. So you actually change the data. You actually modify the data to get rid of this personal information and to hide the personal information. That's pseudonymization. So when you make that information, this personal information, as pseudonymized information, then from that point on, you can use this data for academic purposes and research purposes. But in case of anonymized data, there is no limitation of the use. So that's the kind of distinction between anonymization and pseudonymization of data. And in terms of this re-identification issue, so this is the kind of the issue of accountability and responsibility. So as I already mentioned, there is a kind of huge incentive to the firms to actually use this data and actually reforming this data and get the kind of identification of this data. Then they can actually provide a better targeted, customized, actually advertising and so forth. So if you do not have a kind of clear rules and regulations and some kind of penalties if they breach that kind of regulation, the market force actually incentivizes the firms to actually to use all kind of data mining techniques and all those kind of skills to re-identify this information. So if we believe that personal information, protection of personal information is very important value, social value, then I think we need a clear set of rules and regulations which actually provide a clear guideline on using this re-identification and on data. And I actually missed the third question. Is there another question on this topic?
Not on that topic, but I have another one. That's how do you estimate the cost of personal data, and given that, how can the data, how the economy of digital data can be evaluated?
Thank you very much for that question. That's a very good question. And when you look at the marketplace, there is no kind of exchange market for personal data, but there is a black market. there is no the personal data exchange market because it's almost impossible to actually measure the cost of personal data. But when you look at the blank market, when the most expensive data is health-related data. Personal health-related data is the most expensive one. So when you look at that kind of market price, you can get which kind of information is most highly actually evaluated personal data in market that's health-related. And if you just look at the driver's license number, that's just a few cents. So that's a kind of the not highly appreciated data. But there are that kind of marketplace. But at the same time, when there is a kind of market, we normally have some kind of exchange system. In crypto, we have a crypto exchange market, and stock exchange, we have stock exchange market, and there are exchange markets, but for personal data, it's not. The reason is because when we use this we are living in this multi-sided economy. Data economy is characterized by this multi-sided economy where these platform companies actually provide these free services to its customers, and they make money from the advertisers and other kind of the revenue sources. So when we receive these free services, actually we have a tendency to give our personal data free. And we think that many people believe that they are not bothered to provide their personal information in exchange for this kind of services, search services, or kind of SMS kind of services. So if we actually ourselves value our data as free, then how we can actually exchange this data with some kind of value in other marketplaces? So that's the reason it's extremely difficult to actually measure the kind of value of personal data, but some sensitive data which is actually prohibited to be used in the marketplace, and then those data we still have some prime market, and those data is actually valued very highly. And in that case, if you actually want to get some estimation on the cost or value of some data, you can actually use that as a reference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I have, I would say, a final question, and that's what, in your opinion, what's the adequate way to implement an open data policy concerning costs, security, and knowledge?
Thank you very much for this question. This is actually very important question. At the same time, this is the question many governments are struggling with. So what's the kind of scope of data they should actually open to the general public, and how much data curation should be provided? So that will actually help the small and medium-sized enterprises and even the individuals just take use of that kind of data. So in terms of cost, I think if the government itself can provide some kind of data curation in the raw data and provide kind of the curated data to the general public, that would be much helpful for the small and medium-sized enterprise and individuals to use that data. And in terms of security, this is a sensitive issue. So the government could not release all data because there are some sensitive personal data and security-related, national security or community security-related data. So you need to actually set a clear guideline, whether the kind of the data that can be shared with the general public or that cannot be shared with the general public for the interest of the general public. And in terms of knowledge, I do not know whether I understood correctly the term of knowledge here, but I think sometimes the government just share the kind of the very low rudimentary data with the general public, but they do not share the kind of the data they analyze. But I think if that is not related with the security issue, those kind of analyzed data also need to be shared with the general public for the interest of the whole community. Before closing my remark, I would like to say once again, thank you for your invitation as keynote speaker on this prestigious seminar. At the same time, I just want to emphasize again what I have said today. All the kind of contents were done in my personal capacity. So my comments or my presentation did not represent the views of the OECD or the views of the government of Korea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Min. Thank you for staying so late and sharing with us your knowledge, and we have taken note of your last disclaimer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, ahora hacemos un receso de 10 minutos, so we can continue again in 10 minutes.
Entonces,
Iba a venir Wonki Min
Pues yo creo que sí, sí, lo que yo entiendo.
por su nombramiento ahí de viceministro.